Episode 6 of the Performance Roundtable podcast. On today's episode, we have Nathan Griffith. Nathan is currently doing his prof doc at the University of Birmingham, where he is looking to create a model of deceleration within team sports, as this is currently overlooked in the research. In an industry where opportunities are limited, we discussed how Nathan worked his way into the current role as head of academy at Oxford United, and the ways that coaches can impact their own professional development. So on that, let's begin the podcast. And today we have Nathan on the show. So, Nathan, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yourself? How are you?
Good, Nathan. So, if you want to introduce yourself, a bit of your background and what you're currently doing, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Nathan Griffith. I'm currently the head of Academy Strength Conditioning Coach at Oxford United Football Club, and I'm currently doing my professional doctorate at University of Birmingham, and my supervisor is Barry Drost.
That's nice. So, on your prof doc, and what is your kind of big sort of overall goal with that? Mm-hmm. And then we can go into sort of like the little nitty gritties and the smaller sided studies you're looking at. But what is kind of the overall goal?
So my overall goal is to provide practitioners within football an overview of applied research projects in regards to deceleration. I feel like it's a subject that is very undervalued, and there's a lot of information that is misinformed, and that needs to provide practitioners information so that they can go away, use that information to use it on their own athletes. Again, like I said, I feel like deceleration is massively undervalued, and there's not a lot of information and research on that subject. There's a lot of focus on acceleration and speed, and there's not too much information on deceleration. And if we're looking at football specifically, it's a multi-directional sport, and the way the game is evolving, it's high intensity actions. Players and athletes are having to become versatile, robust, and they're going to have to press a lot more frequently. So for example, if we look at Fulham, not Fulham, sorry, I don't know why I said Fulham, but if we look at Liverpool and how Jurgen Klopp sets his team up, it's pressing from the front. And that's a lot of deceleration aspects that are happening within that game. And it's an important component within change direction. And I feel like, as mentioned before, deceleration, people classify it as not a skill that needs to be trained. However, that's not the case. There should be a technical model to go with deceleration, but at the moment there's not. And that's something that I want to provide practitioners at football clubs, something that they can take away, provide a framework within their academy, and be able to use that to improve the deceleration capacity of their players.
That's interesting. We spoke off air is that you got speed, acceleration, change of direction is getting more popular, but we don't look at it from the both sides. Is change direction, is still focused on acceleration. It's how quickly can we accelerate, not exactly. If we can decelerate faster, it means we can accelerate sooner.
Yeah,
which is what I think a lot of parts we're missing. And we spoke about things like, is that model it needs someone like yourself to curate it, and then other practitioners can start to delve from that and then come up with their own ideas of deceleration. But taking them first steps, I see a massive sort of potential with that and improve that sort of performance. So what is it, your current sort of the research that you've looked at? What is, I know it's very limited, but what is that kind of showing at the moment?
Yeah, so as we spoke off air, the research that there is at the moment, it's all in terms of match demands. So how many decelerations and efforts that a player or position specifically, how many deceleration efforts they do within a 90-minute game, where it could be 60 to 100. But what is that really telling in practitioners? It's not really telling practitioners that much. There needs to be a kind of framework like we discussed. So how many of that 50, 60 deceleration efforts is that at high intensity? Can we differentiate who is a good deceleration performer and who is not? So there's a lot of information in terms of high speed running. So at the moment at Oxford United, how we break down high speed running is meters per second. So 5 meters per second to 7 meters per second, we classify it as a fast jog. 7 meters per second to 9 meters per second, we classify that as high speed running. And anything above 9 meters per second, we classify that as sprint distance. And with that information, we're able to see how fast that player is performing and what intensity they are performing at. And we can individualize their training program from that. and see over time if they're improving. And I feel that the same principle needs to be applied to deceleration. So the quicker that someone comes to a stop would be under 2 meters per second to 3 meters per second. And if someone is a poor deceleration mover, then it would be probably more above 4 meters per second. And as we spoke in off air, is that in my personal experience, the players that tend to struggle with deceleration ability is those fast, athletic, mobile players. So they're able to produce so much force from an acceleration standpoint, but when it comes to the point where they need to change direction, slow down, they can't. They're unable to produce that necessary force to come to a stop quick enough. And then another position that I feel that needs a lot more work on deceleration ability within my personal experience is centre backs. Centre backs nowadays are 6 foot plus tall, and I find that they don't have the proprioception, they don't have that body awareness to come to a stop quicker, because within one of the key markers within deceleration is making sure that you have low center of mass to be able to make sure that you can produce force through the ground and have that heel strike through the ground. So they're the two aspects where I find and have looked and analyzed in football where position specific that wingers and centre backs need to improve on that ability. And again, it's providing that framework. And if you've identified that someone has a poor deceleration movement capacity, then what can you do for them? What can you do for them on the pitch? And what can you do for them in the gym? And I find, I just think personally, that's what we're missing at the moment within research. And my prof doc right now is to provide applied research. So practitioners can go away and provide a framework for they can work on.
Yeah, so 2 things on that is, one, he said about the current research is all about sort of load management at the moment.
Yeah.
Is there kind of any sort of, I'm sure there is, but research that says positional demands on load decelerations? Is there any that out there at the moment, or is that kind of still scratching the surface?
From what I'm aware, there isn't. And there's so much focus on a match scenario, but how many decelerations should be occurring prior and like leading up to a game?
Yeah.
So there's so much information in terms of load, in terms of total distance, and it's periodized. So on a match day +2 after a game on a Monday, everything total distance should be below 5K. Your players are still recovering. But so we know that from a total distance perspective, and we know that from a high-speed running perspective. But what should it look like from a high-speed running? What should it look like from a deceleration aspect? How many deceleration efforts and from what intensity should they performing at from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and leading on so forth to a game? So there's so much focus on what is happening within a match, but there's even less focus of what you should be doing and covering within a training week.
As we spoke about, is that, like you said, deceleration seems to be an afterthought. Now, I know there are coaches that do certain deceleration drills in some of their warm-ups and part of their sessions, but when looking at load management, like you said, is a good decelerator and a bad decelerator might be able to handle different loads. Like acceleration, if you can accelerate correctly and put the force in the correct places, you can handle more acceleration. One, you've been better at the sport, but from injury prevention point of view, we want good movers. So from your point of view, getting that model of what a good decelerator looks like, I think is crucial to that next step of then development. Is let's identify what the good decelerators, what do they do well, and then create a model from that. And that's when people go a bit more leeway into how they want to do their own deceleration drills. Yeah. But at the moment, it is kind of like whizzing in the dark, because we think this looks good, let's do that. But there's no sort of standardized format.
Exactly. And being able to have a good deceleration ability is making sure that you're able to perform decelerations within frontal, sagittal, and transverse planes of motion. And the whole point of decelerations is how well can your muscles cope within the eccentric loading of coming to a stop. And so, like I said, fast players that I experienced of have poor deceleration ability. So what can I do with them in the gym? So what I'm going to show you right now is I'm just going to share my screen and something that we're currently using at Oxford United Football Club. So if I have identified someone that has a a poor deceleration ability, I'm going to start them at a level 1 stage, which is just making sure that they have, I'm providing them a slow stretch shortening cycle program, and we're going from, have they got eccentric control and single leg stability, which could be level 1 is a drop squat. We then look at sagittal movements, because that's what's important within a multi-directional sport such as football. Can they squat jump and then stick and have that eccentric control, again, movement? And then again, from frontal movements, like I said, football's multi-directional. There's loads of lateral movements involved in that. Can they perform a lateral broad jump and then stick that motion? Again, these are the same principles that are going to be happening, and the requirements of the correct technique of what's going to happen when we slow down into a deceleration stop. And then again, transverse motions, transverse movements again. So can you perform a 90-degree jump and still have that eccentric loading through the body and be able to decelerate your body and have a correct low center of mass? And then once they can progress onto level 1, we then go to level 2, so the intensity gets harder. And then what you hope to see from that is that they're able to cope with that ability of come to a stop at a quicker rate, and they're able to use their muscles and have that eccentric lengthening to come to a stop quicker. And that's a solely aim of what we want to do. Again, this is not perfect, but this, at least that is a guideline of what I can follow to improve someone's deceleration ability.
Again, it's creating, again, I really like what you're doing there by just having different levels. It's especially plyometrics is a lot of times it's just the depth people go focus on.
Yeah,
it's hard to measure the kind of plyometrics sometimes, how well someone's doing. I know there's different like jump mats and stuff, but having an actual progression of that can help a lot, especially in the newer coaches when they just get into it and like, oh, we saw this looks pretty good, or we saw some of the first team players doing these wacky movements. Let's copy them. Having a, just like people just have a squat progression,
yeah,
plyometrics is exactly the same. So on your lit things you just shown, so anyone that is watching on Spotify, Nathan showed a PowerPoint. So if you want to quickly go onto YouTube or just listen to what he said, he did explain it quite well. But there is a little PowerPoint and just the movements and the levels. There was a few of the exercises he didn't say, which is fine. But if you want a quick bit more in depth to what he said, go onto the YouTube and check that out. So on them sort of movements, like how did you come up with them at the levels? Did you just experience, or the kind of money research in that area?
Again, it's just really experience. I just think that, again, like we were saying, looking at the movement of deceleration overall, it's having the capacity of being able to produce force within an eccentric phase. And if a performer has lack of deceleration ability, then they're not going to be comfortable, and they're not going to have that strength capacity of performing eccentric motions. So I thought of, okay, what exercises can I provide an athlete which enables them within sagittal, frontal, and transverse motions of kind of exercises that are able to, one, improve the eccentric ability, but first and foremost, being able to have that control of that eccentric motion. And I find that's most important, because if they have control and have that proprioception, that balance of being able to use that muscle appropriately within that movement, then they're automatically going to improve their deceleration ability. So again, I think the exercises were just based on what I've previously done with athletes and what I've seen that has worked. And again, it's not right. It might not work for someone else's athlete, but at the moment they're working for mine. So again, I think it's for just based on practical experience.
So with sort of like you have your standard barbell movement, there's so much research on them. It's so easy just to fall in love with them because they're quite useful and they're easy to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So plyometrics, a lot of it experience and a lot of it is looking at what other coaches do.
Mm-hmm.
And plyometrics fall into that category where it's so easy to bastardize and do some wacky movement that has no sort of relation to what they want to do, where they've kind of gone over the top with the exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So what I like to say then, it's kind of breaking down the end goal, which I think a lot more coaches, even if you're not experienced, you can watch footage of someone decelerating or someone accelerating and look at the movement they do,
Yeah.
and the planes of movement they go into, and then try and replicate that with your plyometrics. Now, you don't have to reinvent the wheel and make a new plyometric exercise. When you try and navigate the kind of the Instagrams and the YouTubes of what you're trying to see is a good exercise, if you have that sort of, again, that model that you're going towards, and reverse engineer it into the exercises.
I think it all basically comes down to, Adam, is just that keeping it simple. Don't speed up what you can't slow down. A lot of people, again, like you're saying, is they look at Instagram, they look at Twitter, they see someone posting something and they automatically think, oh, that looks fancy, let me try that with my athletes. But your athlete might not be able to cope with that exercise. They might not have that eccentric capacity of, slowing their body down. So there's nothing wrong if your athlete can't do fancy stuff. Just keep the basics, keep the fundamentals, and eventually they'll be able to increase that intensity and be able to more cope with more them complex tasks that you want, and eventually be more task specific to training and matches. So I think the message right here, just if you're listening to this, is and if you're thinking about providing any type of program, is start from scratch, start from the most basics. And yes, from a player's perspective, it might be boring, but that's where you have to have that relationship with your athlete, and be able to express that, how important that it is. I think one thing that I've learned within being a strength conditioning practitioner is that athletes don't care how much that unless how much you care for them. As long as you build that interpersonal, relationship with them, and you have that bond, and they trust you, because that's the main thing. They have to trust you, and it's in its process. You can't go into a football club and be brand new and just try and implement so many things, because it won't work like that. You won't get the buy-in. You could have the best program in the world, right? And on research, it could work. Everything on scientific paper is saying they'll improve 20-30%. But if that athlete doesn't buy into you and doesn't believe in that program, then that gym program, that program that you created and spent so much time on, is worthless. So as much as you need to build a program and a framework within your academy, it's most important that you gain that buy-in with the athlete. I think that's most important.
On the buy-in side of it, and he said about keep it simple is great, because yes, you might have the best program, but if it's simple and it can get some results, that creates that buy-in. And then when you start getting more great relationships with them, you can be like, listen, we're going to try something a bit new today, or a bit different. This is what I've seen. I think it's going to do really well. And wanting to get some more buy-in, because it's the honesty. Disclaimer, this won't work for every sort of system we worked in. I've worked with certain players that they questioned everything I've done. Sometimes if you're a young coach, you're an older player, they might question it. They're stuck in their ways, they're stubborn. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's their career. They want to make sure they're doing something that works. And then just start off simple. If you understand what you're doing, then when you start to mix things up, add a bit of spice to stuff, then have conversation with your athletes and your coaches. This is what we're trying. This is what we want to do. And then with the Instagram thing, I think people remember that Instagram is a business. What they're doing it for. So these amazing exercises, they catch your eye, and that's the reason for it. We might get them there, and they will use these high level athletes that have been same trick that's caught you. Is they saw another high level athlete doing something crazy, and people are simple. Something new, something that looks crazy must be good. So it's take it with a pinch of salt, and if you don't understand it, go and understand it. Do something you understand.
Exactly.
On your research, if you just want to outline the kind of process you're undergoing now in terms of studying, it'd be quite interesting.
Yeah, sure. So I'm in my first year of my prof doc, going really well. I'm learning a lot. If anyone's interested in doing prof doc, I would definitely recommend it. But I would just mention that it is hard in terms of balancing a full-time work, and not just that, but your personal life as well. You might have other things going in the background, and then having to concentrate on your research. But what I'm doing at the moment is actually just completing my first assessment, which is actually a self-audit. of myself, what I need to work on, my previous experiences within research, and just understanding what are my areas of improvements that I need to make to enable me to in the future to improve my research skills and be able to publish research papers. The second part of that is a research proposal. So discussing and having an introduction of deceleration, and then narrowing down why this is important. And like I said, like we've just mentioned previously, there's a lack of research and there's loads of gaps within deceleration. Another thing that we mentioned previously is that when someone's going through maturation, they may come across adolescent awkwardness. And as we know, if a player has adolescent awkwardness, then their motor skills are affected by this. But from a result of that, is deceleration affected by this? And again, this is all questions that have not been answered for a long while. And these are questions that I want to be answered and that I think that will be beneficial for practitioners to know and to inform them, so that if that situation does occur, they know how to handle that, and they can feed back to a scientific paper, which is not just scientific, but it's also applied because it's been used within an applied environment. And then on the third part of my assessment is just creating a training program. So like a training cycle of a continuum of what I want to achieve from a certain date and to a finish time. So my study one is, as mentioned previously, is that within a match, within loads of research at the moment, it's what are positions or players performing overall within a match. But as mentioned, there's nothing in terms of leading up to a match. So my first study is looking at the in-season demands of deceleration performance, and then moving on to study two, which is then creating a kind of framework on if you're capable of using GPS, whether that be Catapult, Playtech, or anything else that you may use, is that can you classify deceleration? So instead of just publishing a training report which has an overall number, can you actually find more information about that? So like I said, can you create a kind of continuum of 2 meters per second to 3 meters per second? That classifies as someone who's come to a stop at a quick rate. Or then can you progress that? Can you find a framework where you can classify performers that are not so good at deceleration, which has a higher meters per second? So so there's lots of, it's such a broad topic area, and one that I'm really excited to explore. I know that there's going to be some difficulties, such as one is that how can we test deceleration? Because there's only a deceleration deficit. There actually needs to be more of a test that needs to be available to practitioners. At the moment, there isn't one. But one thing that I've seen and that could potentially work, which is cost-free and that anyone can use, is called a binary app, which is something that Jonas Dodu, who's a sprint coach at Loughborough University, created. And by this, it tells you the contact time and the seconds of how quick that person has come to a stop. So that's something that could potentially be available within the future to practitioners to be able to use. So yeah, that's the direction of where I want my project to be.
It's quick on the prof doc, because I don't spend too much time on that. It is very interesting in terms of the process for prof doc, is because I only recently even looked at one of them, but everyone's always thought the PhD route is for the prof doc. Just why did you choose that? Just because it fit around your lifestyle or your current situation, or just because that was the opportunity that was arrived to you?
As a person, I think I'm ambitious. I'm a driven individual person, and I always want to better myself constantly. I've missed having to balance research and full-time work. When I did my master's, that was a full-time program while also working full-time. And I just felt in general, as it's been 2 years since I achieved my master's from Middlesex University, I just felt very lazy. I felt like I weren't doing enough. And again, I thought that the topic of deceleration was a subject that I wanted to understand better, and I wanted to try to be an expert in. And I thought it was a perfect opportunity. And the difference, like you mentioned, between a PhD and a prof doc is that a prof doc, it's more applied, and it's more applied to applied practitioners. And that's the field that I want to be in for the remaining future. So I thought it was an amazing opportunity to do that. And what was the most appealing thing for me was the supervisor that I had, Barry Drust. He's been a leading expert within this field and has led so many practitioners through their journeys, and has been and worked at one of the best football clubs in the world. And I thought, to be able to be mentored and be supervised by him, I'm only going to learn and improve as a practitioner. So I thought it was an opportunity that I couldn't turn down.
Yeah, with the prof doc PhDs, that a lot of people, like myself, who are a bit more applied rather than the research side. Like, I really enjoyed my master's dissertation, but me doing 4 years in a PhD, luckily the ones near me are all linked with clubs.
Yeah.
I know a lot of the PhDs you do get are pure research, and you have to do all your own studies. It can be quite off-putting that someone wants to progress their career and get that coaching experience at the same time.
Yeah.
So when we all collect data when we coach people. So you're essentially just getting that data, having more purpose behind that data, and then writing it up. So even though it is a lot of more work, overall, it's something that I like. Again, it's the bit, but you said about being lazy, not with that kind of, you want not doing as much as you should be doing.
Yeah.
I know I myself are the same. I should be reading more articles. I should be looking into more areas. It's kind of hard to motivate yourself to do that sometimes.
Exactly.
Having that, again, it's something that's doing this podcast series. It's something that become more appealing to me, compared to the PhD.
For sure.
And on that's what we said then about players, coaches already doing the testing. Is there's no harm, and I get your opinion on what I think coaches should be looking at in doing their own testing. If they've got GPS, let's start. Actually, what are we doing? It's one reason we said about deceleration in football is one of the reasons I thought we've quite interesting podcast is because no one is looking at that at all. And it's something that we can start, like the process of, if you get, say, 20 people, 10 people listen to this and go, well, let's try it. They can reach out to you if you've got some free time, you've got some time, and just discuss what your findings are. Now, it won't be published research, but that sort of informing the community of S&C coaches is where actually change happens. Because like we said, people don't always read research as frequently as we like to. So having conversations with yourself and these podcasts to provoke actual further development in practice is one of the reasons I started this sort of series.
Exactly. And I find that is something that within the strength conditioning community that we are actually getting better at. People are starting to reach out, and we're trying to help each other. But before, I felt like it was, okay, this is my kind of philosophy, this is what works for me. If I share that with someone else, then they're going to be better than me. But that's not the case at all. And I think that, again, as a strength conditioning community, we're getting better at it. And actually, there's a group chat that I created, which practitioners from around the world, if they're an intern, if they're in the professional football game, anyone can put a question in, and we help each other. And that's what you want. We want to learn. We want to be able to do the right things for our own players. So again, it's such a great thing that there's a lot of people starting to help each other out. A lot of people starting to post, again, things on Twitter and Instagram, informing what they do within their practice, and just get a judge of what is right and what is wrong. And if you can take away anything from that and use it within your practice.
The biggest thing for me, we said there, like coaches becoming more acceptable in speaking to each other, is when first starting this podcast, like I spoke to a few people here and there, but I never really reached out to anyone. It's been quite daunting just to message them out of the blue, like start a conversation. There needs to be like a Tinder for strength coaches. They would just speak to each other, makes it a lot easier. There you go, the business idea. But since having the podcast and reaching out to practitioners, is a lot of them have been responsive, and even just some of them are busy, so they can't come on the show, but they've explained what they're doing. And my biggest advice when you are speaking to people is don't go in there with just a hi, how you doing, or a random generic copy and paste question. Is find out as much as you can about that person before you speak to them, or ask them, are you at your work at Oxford? What's that like? Like an actual question that they can answer them. Because it's not, if you're going to speak back to someone, it can be a bit awkward to just be like, I am good. What are you up to? Like MSN days conversation. So go in there with purpose when networking, because one, you're going to benefit yourself. It's a lonely community. Like I said before, people did think of competition, which is very high at the moment, but it's less me versus you. It's more, we all want a job and we happen to be going against each other.
Yeah.
And majority of the time you're not, because people don't live in the same environment as you. You live in all across the country, across the world. Someone from Spain is not going to get a local League One club.
Yeah.
But we're probably going to stay in Spain.
Yeah. It's getting so competitive now, like getting jobs, and it's becoming more about who you know. So networking is definitely key. And I would definitely recommend that, reaching out to people, but not always asking, what can you do for me? What can you do for them? And just like you said, just even if it's just a question of what they do at their own, program, just asking little questions. But they're not gonna give you something after one message of you speaking to them. It's a process, like. It has to evolve, and that relationship has to evolve, and then eventually, hopefully, something comes good of it. I understand that there's a lot of people that want to get into the industry, but you also have to be patient. I mean, for me, it took me 3-4 internships, and then when I got my first full-time role at Barnet Football Club, I was only there for 6-7 months, because at the time when I joined them, they got relegated to the National League, so I was made redundant, and that was a blow. But you just have to keep being motivated, keep persistent. If there's something that you want to do, then you do it. The only way you can fail is by giving up. And when I was made redundant, I went to Peterborough United Football Club. It was a part-time role. I was traveling 2 hours, probably 3 days a week. And I was probably I was spending more of my money that I received from Peterborough on petrol than I was actually my own time. And then on the weekends, I was actually doing a bar job. I did that for a good 11-12 months. And even in that stage, I was able to get interviews from other football clubs, but I just wasn't successful. Then opportunity came from Oxford United, where I was able to, lead my current job right now, where I have been for 2 years, being able to lead their program and strength conditioning from under 9s all the way to under 23s. Again, it's just a process, it's a journey, and you've got to enjoy it. And yeah, again, I'm an ambitious individual, driven person that just wants the best of myself.
So on the networking side of it, like I think great what you said there is, don't go in expecting something straight away. It's very simplistic to be like, oh, I'm gonna put message, and then they will see my name, then they will hire me. It's the people, when you say it's who you know, it's who knows you more than who you know, sort of thing. So if you just someone's message once, they probably won't remember your name. When looking for like 300 applicants, they probably got 300 messages. But it sounds a bit sort of cliche or cringy, is that from a strength coach point of view, who are our favorite athletes? The ones that come and speak to us, that ask us questions, that engage you what we're doing. So if you use that same mindset on LinkedIn, if someone puts a post out, like giving it a like or asking a question on that post, it goes a bit further than privately messaging them.
Exactly.
Like, we're all in it to kind of boost our sort of like our information and get out there. So something as simple as liking someone's post, if someone's only got 3 likes and you like a lot of their posts, they're going to remember that.
Yeah.
It's something a little cringy, and it's a bit, don't just do it just like people's posts. Generally be interested in what they're doing, but be aware that if you like someone's stuff, like it. Because it goes a long way just helping them get the information out and just building that bond. Like,
sure.
Yeah. So on the second bit you said about sort of you had 4 internships, or I'm being very vocal about how awful the industry is for new people getting into it.
Mhm.
It's you either get no wage or a decent wage,
Yeah.
or a very good wage. There's like the decent wage is very far and few between.
Mhm.
There's a few good wages, and the majority of them are going to be awful.
Mhm.
And you got two options: you can play the game or get out of it.
Mhm.
Is that sometimes you've just got to way you got to see it is this is going to progress my career. And I've been
Sure.
in the same situation when my first roles. It worked out. I was on about 50p an hour.
Mhm.
With all the work I was putting in, the travel, the actual coaching. And it gets to a point when that is affecting your mindset of the role, and that will affect your ability to coach. It just, from my opinion, I don't know if you feel the same, just accept what it is, put that to the side, do what you can, and then plan for the future.
Yeah. I just think that if you want something so bad, then you'll go for it and you'll make it happen, no matter what the consequences are. And for me, it took 4 internships, but I was grateful that while I was doing those internships, I was still studying. So my first year of university, my undergraduate, it was Derby County Girls Centre of Excellence. Then in my second, it was Derby County Boys. Again, it was all voluntary, but I didn't mind that because I was, still learning the craft of it, and I was still learning myself. I hadn't even got my undergraduate degree yet. And then my third internship was at Birmingham City Football Club. And that was a really great opportunity. I was able to learn more about in terms of the trainer load, in terms of GPS, catapult, player tech, and being able to speak to a coach about what has just happened on the training pitch, and what does it mean. And I just loved the strength conditioning and sports science of it. And I knew from even at my undergraduate level that it's such a saturated market and it's such a hard kind of industry to get into. But that didn't put me off. I still went and did my master's and wanted to gain more applied practical experience. And there was a vacancy for an intern at Charlton Athletic Football Club. And I was there for 3-4 months while doing my master's. But then while I was doing that internship, I was able to get my first full-time employment at Barnet. Yes, it didn't work out for me, but I know for a full fact that I wouldn't have got that full-time opportunity if it wasn't for my previous experiences and for me doing my master's and for my persistence and being just motivated individual. Yes, I'm not saying that it was all bright and happy. There were some difficult moments, but it's how you overcome them hard moments and what shapes you as a character of a person. And again, I think each of them, those extras, like you were saying, just not turning up at 9 a.m, then going home 1 a.m. I see a lot of professional footballers that after training's finished, they do 5-10 minutes individuals, then they go back in. You hear stories such as David Beckham, that he was practicing his free kicks, he was practicing his craft. And that's what a load of players are missing these days, is that they say they want it, but do they really want it? And I think it's the same as people that are trying to get into the industry. You say you want it, but do you really want it? And I think that there are opportunities if you make them for yourself. For example, recently we have 2 loan players that have gone out on loan to Woking Football Club, and I wanted to gain first team football experience. So all I did was, when there was a match of Oxford playing, I can't remember the team that was playing at the moment, but the manager of Woking came to watch the 2 players that he had. And I just approached him and I introduced myself, said, "Hi, my name's Nathan. I'm the strength conditioning coach. This is what I do. Would you be interested in my services?" And for me, the benefit I would gain from it would be to have first team experience. And he wanted to learn what I could provide to him, as that team was going from part-time to full-time, hopefully next season. And he wanted to know how I could develop his players physically. So there's always opportunities. It's how you go about and how you go and get them.
Yeah. So on 2 points there, I think it's really interesting. One, that is that you went out with, like, something like networking. The little thing I do is, as a private PT or SNC, if you want to call it, is just speak to people. A little tip before COVID is, where do the people you want to train like go? So you want to work with general population, just go and spend some time Holland and Barrett or the protein aisle in Morrison's. They're normally clueless because they're buying supplements from these places that look overpriced, just chat to them and say, oh, what you went that for? Like the other day I had a taxi ride because my car was getting fixed, and I was just speaking to the guy. I saw a guy had some grippers, like the grip training stuff.
Yeah.
So I asked him, like, what are you doing that for? Like, are you grip training? Had a conversation with him, said I was a PT, and then you get a client or you get the potential lead, and it's exactly the same with what you're saying there, is that you saw an opportunity, you saw a coach there, the perfect opportunity to get a face-to-face sort of, hi, I'm Nathan, this is what I do, and you took it. But the point I want to really address is that the current sort of narrative about students is you come out of university, no experience, let's go and coach. Is the guys like yourself, like me, who been coaching since the first year of our degrees. I come out with 2,000 hours of like experience, wherever it was. Like I'm coaching multiple placements every week, because one, you have the time, the funding, and the opportunity to get all these placements. So you'll find the ones that want to work at S&C have already put the groundwork in year one of their degree or year two of their degree. I was lucky that my degree was a practical degree, so you had to do a minimum hours just to pass it. So it kind of forced me to do the hours, as well as going out and getting extras. But the other side, the ones that get end of the year, they've enjoyed their masters or their degree, then start to go into it. That's not a bad thing either. Like most people go to uni, especially sports science, to get drunk and have a good time. Like I went to court sports coaching originally to play rugby league at Met. So I then turned that into a career path. So it's not like a negative. You come out of university with 1 year experience or no year experience. You just understand you're going against people with 4 years experience at the same age as you. If you look at a lot of, like, Eddie Jones was a school teacher. A lot of other, like, I think it was Eddie Jones school. Shoot Lancaster was a school teacher. Sorry, I'm not sure about Eddie Jones, but Shoot Lancaster was a school teacher. A lot of coaches, I've listened to podcasts, the school teachers that have converted into strength conditioning or that sort of coaching is just managing people. If you're currently a manager at a local company, that is still the same skill set of a S&C coach, just your knowledge might be different. I worked a lot of time doing mixology, bar classes, events, just speaking to people, and personally I don't drink, but then speak around people that drink. If you work in rugby, everyone drinks. So just being around different people with different backgrounds helps you be that chameleon. Creating them relationships, like you said earlier, is you might find your personality just doesn't click with a certain player. I've had plenty of situations like that. But being able to adapt how you treat different players that you might have gained experience from someone, especially working in semi-pro sport, a lot of them do work labourer jobs or they do work teachers. So that's sort of, I know it's a bit of a tangent, but getting experience from different avenues is just as valuable as a coach. Maybe not to be hired, but as your skill set maybe. Just going to move on because of time, and I'm going to really appreciate what you've been so far. Is 3 questions left really, 2 small ones, but one sort of bigger one is, so one for a coach, one for sort of a player. Going away from this podcast or after speaking to you, what should coaches be doing regarding deceleration? What can they do straight away?
Sure. I think they need to actually, like I said, people don't see and value deceleration as an actual ability or a skill set that they need to have. So I would actually just watch your players and how they come to a stop, and then see and pinpoint who actually needs to improve their deceleration ability. That could be just your normal lines on a warm-up, right? And just seeing, can you sprint 10 meters and then come to a stop as quickly as you can? And just see their technique and see their movement pattern. Have they got good heel strike to the floor? Are they leaning back? And another misconception of deceleration is that you need to take as many little steps to slow down, which is false, because really you don't want that. Because if the whole point of deceleration is being able to produce force through the ground. So if you're producing the necessary amount of force through the ground, then you don't need that many little steps. It really is just 1 or 2, 3 steps that you need to take to slow down. So again, there's so many misconceptions of deceleration that people are not aware of, and they need to be informed. So I would say just have a picture and analyze your players that you work with, and just pinpoint who has good and poor deceleration ability. And my advice would be go to the wingers, your most athletic, mobile players, and then also go to your very tall players that probably don't have that lack that coordination and balance. Because if they lack coordination balance, then they're also going to be unable to get into that position to slow down deceleration.
So like what you said there is that it's kind of a poor technique or capability to decelerate has become into a coaching model.
Yeah.
So they've kind of observed it, it's what people are doing, and it's taken it as small steps equals good.
Yeah.
And but if we actually think about it, in rugby, especially if you watch a good change of direction, which is an decel XL, it's an exaggerated step, a real pushing one way and coming back the other way. So doing small steps, like you see a lot in the NFL when they do the sort of shuffle, it doesn't really work in rugby because you haven't got that. You got someone running at you. In NFL, that might work because you've got that time where it's no contact.
Yeah.
In rugby and even football, where someone's coming towards that tackle,
Mm-hmm.
you can't do these little steps. You need to be bang out the way. And then if you do watch NFL, it is the small steps are more to confuse them, and then it's the big step to change the direction. The small steps just that where we're going, and then bang.
Right?
But
like it's an evading sport, right? So they're trying to get away from their player or their opponent. But where rugby and football is involved, they're trying to escape. They're trying to get to a certain destination. So yeah.
And then on the player side of it, if you're a player listening to this, what could you do deceleration wise to improve your deceleration? Maybe what does that look like, or some sort of how do you improve it basically?
Yeah. So if you're a player and you're listening to this, what I would say is if you think about the descent phase of a squat, what is the perfect picture? So it's legs a little bit wider than shoulder width. Are my knees in line with my toes? Are my hips sunk? Are they flexed in a position? And is my back nice and straight? Okay. And is it parallel to the floor? So when we come to a stop, we're in that exact same position. So what I would recommend you doing is, if you can, get someone to record you of sprinting at least 10 to 15 meters of a distance and come to a stop as quickly as you can. And if you can see yourself having that same position of what you would look like in the descent phase of a squat, so again, knees over the line of the toes, everything in line, everything forward, your toes are pointing out or straight, and you have that leaned over body shape position where your back's nice and straight and parallel to the floor, then you're starting at a good start. And again, with that misconception of taking as many little steps as you can, try and avoid that and try and come to a stop where you're taking fewer steps as possible. So that would try and encourage you to produce force through the ground.
That's great. So obviously you're doing a lot of research in your sort of areas, acceleration. From looking at the research and what sort of stuff that is kind of interesting you, if you was another researcher, or say you wanted to go do another prof doc or something similar as prof doc, where would you look into in deceleration? What sort of topic area would you go into?
I would aim to, as you know, prof docs are applied, so I'd want to try and create a case study. What exercises are appropriate for deceleration to improve their ability to slow down, and over, let's say, a case study of 8 weeks, how can we improve that deceleration ability? So testing them from, and that could be, doing a 5-5 agility test, and then doing a deceleration deficit, because that's the only kind of marker that we have right now to test whether someone is a good deceleration mover or not. And then having that, post end testing of seeing if they've improved or not. But yeah, what I would like to see is a case study of what you can do with a player to improve their performance within the gym. And as we've mentioned throughout this podcast, it's if you have a good deceleration ability, then you're able to produce force. So really, you need to be able to allow and create a program for your athlete that they're generating lots of forces through the ground to be able to come to a stop. And then I think, like we've mentioned, that football is a multi-directional sport, and you can't just focus on sagittal movements. It has to also be lateral and transverse motions. So again, I would like to see a case study designated to improve deceleration in a sagittal movement, but then also see it from a lateral and transverse movement playing with it side of it as well.
That definitely would be interesting. Just again, just increase that conversation. Just give some practitioners something to look at and say, this is what we can build from. Because all we do now, we're just building and building in this area, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah.
Especially with practitioners like yourself and more the applied practitioners that know what the sport looks like and know what is realistic. The only problem I see with case studies that are done behind closed doors is that we know that the schedules of athletes are completely different to what we can get on a closed door situation. So yes, it is easy to control variables, but how applied is it?
Again, and it's something that we haven't talked about this within this podcast is every session within football, there's also at the end of the training session is small-sided games. How can you liaise with the coach to be able to get the best output of your players within that small-sided game? So yes, the whole point and focus is on, you know, the element of having it match specific to a football and prepping them for the match, but can you get the output and the physical output of the accels and decels that you want? Can you manipulate the small sided games to get the correct output? So can you make the pitch size area a little bit bigger before they go into small sided games? So something that I do with my coach at Oxford United is that before we go into a small-sided game, we start from 1v1, but they don't start originally in the middle. So what you see is that with both corner flags, they have to sprint as fast as they can to one side to come to a stop, then change direction, and then they have the 1v1 battle. They then do that for 60 seconds, and then the next 60 seconds is the 2v2. So again, it's going from 1v1 all the way to 6v6. And then what you see, the first two people that did the 1v1 battle, they then come out, so they sprint out, come to a stop and wait. Then it goes back down from 6v6 back to 1v1. And that's one way that we can get the correct output, and we can control that measurable of how we know how many deceleration efforts that they are performing within that small-sided game. So again, it's having that understanding of how can you manipulate sessions to get the correct physical output that you want from them.
Yeah, I'm really getting this trend from what you're saying is kind of like just awareness at the moment.
Yeah.
We're at the awareness stage. A few of the episodes I spoke to people is when you're in the early research is creating that awareness to inform practice. But the last question, because again, time-wise, is who in the research that you're kind of working with, maybe a prof doc or someone you've spoke to that you find their research quite interesting, they might be useful for a podcast, or is there a certain area, maybe a deceleration podcast or a practitioner you might like to see more on a roundtable style podcast?
Yeah, for sure. Someone who I've looked into their research a lot in deceleration. I'm still new. I'm trying to look from an applied perspective because that's been my field. But another person who is looking into deceleration and who's probably a little bit further than myself, but he's not just looking in football, he's looking at in tennis and other general sports, is Damien Harper. I would say he's a very leading expert in deceleration. And then another practitioner is Tom DeSantos, who I would recommend to have that deeper, insightful knowledge of, comparing accels and deceleration to ground reaction forces. And that's the kind of research that they're looking into. Whereas myself is kind of aiming towards case studies. What can we do, exercises can we do to improve deceleration ability? What sessions can you put on pitch to improve deceleration, coming from just a much more applied experience. So yeah, I'd definitely be Damien Harper or Tom DeSantos.
Great. I'll have a look into their stuff. It's kind of quite interesting. So again, thank you for coming on. I've really enjoyed having you on. It's been something just to think about. Like, again, what I like having these sort of new sort of research ideas, because not many people think about deceleration. So I think it's quite an interesting topic to get coaches thinking. So I ask you, everyone on this, where's the best place to contact you if you want to be contacted? Either Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever you want to use. So yeah, just want to fire that away.
Yeah, so LinkedIn, Nathan Griffith, so Nathan, and Griffith spelled as Griffith. And then my Twitter is Nathan Griffith, and then X at the end. I also have my business on Instagram where I post all my related information of what I do in terms of my philosophy and the sessions that I carry out on Instagram, which is enhance.performance.
Okay, that's great. So once again, thank you for coming on. And that's the end of the show. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you want to keep up to date with the episodes, see extra clips, or just want to have a chat, then you can follow us on Performance Roundtable Podcast on YouTube, Adam Bromley 12 on Twitter, Adam Bromley on LinkedIn, or ATP Conditioning on Instagram. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, please get in touch. See you next time.